Today, I just want to open your mind. I realize that you are being bombarded on your TV, your radio, and the internet with climate change, and you may think such things like, what is the point of going on? Because by the time I'm old enough to retire, there won't be an earth here to survive and enjoy my retirement. So today we're just going to have a question and answer session with Google, and I'll let you be the decision, but I would highly encourage you to apply logic. And I'm going to try and ask as many questions as possible, and they may or may not be received, and Google may not read them to me. And please forgive me for the audio because I'm actually using my cell phone as a hotspot to record it onto another phone so I can play it back to you guys. So here we go. When did the Industrial Revolution begin?
The Industrial Revolution started in 1760.
What was the cause of the Industrial Revolution?
According to History Crunch, historians have identified several causes for the Industrial Revolution, including the emergence of capitalism, European imperialism, efforts to mine coal, and the effects of the Agricultural Revolution.
Did the Industrial Revolution cause climate change?
According to Landmark Academy, however, since the Industrial Revolution, humans have expelled copious amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This has triggered an unnatural warming that has seen the Earth's temperature rise dramatically over a short period of time.
How long ago was it since the last ice age?
According to CDM.org, the last glacial period began about 100,000 years ago and lasted until 25,000 years ago.
When was the Earth last involved in a deep freeze? How did the Earth get out of the deep freeze?
Here's a summary from Science Daily. Carbon dioxide helped ancient Earth escape deathly deep freeze. The Toronto scientists say that as Earth's temperatures cooled, oxygen was drawn into the ocean, where it oxidized organic matter, releasing the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Does the sun contribute to global climate change?
According to NASA Climate Change, no, the sun can influence Earth's climate, but it isn't responsible for the warming trend we've seen over recent decades.
Does the Earth's wobble and elliptical orbit contribute to climate change?
According to Wikipedia, axial tilt and orbital eccentricity will both contribute their maximum increase in solar radiation during the northern hemisphere's summer. Axial precession will promote more extreme variation in irradiation of the northern hemisphere and less extreme variation in the south.
What is solar radiation? What is the definition of solar radiation? Solar radiation. Keeps giving me the same bullshit, but doesn't want to read it. So in other words, if you weren't paying attention already, they say that the sun, on one hand, does not contribute enough to the climate change we see today, but it was enough, depending on where the Earth is in its location to the sun, can melt the ice and allow us to have the life we enjoy today. How long does it take for the Earth to go around the sun?
365 days. According to NASA, Earth revolves around the Sun in 365 days, 5 hours, 59 minutes, and 16 seconds. The time a planet takes to revolve around the Sun is called a year.
How long does it take for the Earth to complete one wobble?
About 26,000 years. According to COTF, the wobble of Earth's axis, one complete cycle for Earth takes about 26,000 years.
So if we add in the elliptical orbit and the wobble, depending on, let's say for example, you lived in Washington State and Earth was at its closest proximity to the sun physically, and the Earth happened to be tilted down in such a way where Washington State was in a summer month or summer day, you'd be feeling extremely hot temperatures. Whereas on the opposite side, on the farthest reach of the sun from the Earth orbit, you might be feeling the exact opposite, right? So you'd be having temperature extremes. Does the sun affect climate change?
Here's a summary from NASA Climate Change. The Sun can influence Earth's climate, but it isn't responsible for the warming trend we've seen over recent decades. But the warming we've seen in recent decades is too rapid to be linked to changes in Earth's orbit and too large to be caused by solar activity.
Does the Earth's wobble and elliptical orbit affect climate change? Come on. When the Earth's orbit is at its most elliptic, about 23% more incoming solar radiation reaches Earth at our planet's closest approach to the Sun each year than it does from a furthest departure from the Sun. The total change in global annual insolation due to eccentricity cycle is very small. Well, Google doesn't want to read that to me, evidently. But so the sun has no role at all in climate change, according to them. But then it does when you apply logic. Do volcanoes affect climate change?
According to USGS, volcanoes can impact climate change. During major explosive eruptions, huge amounts of volcanic gas, aerosol droplets, and ash are injected into the stratosphere.
Imagine that. The ash and the droplets of gases, whatever they may or may not be, can block out the sunlight or dim the sunlight and cause an actual global cooling effect. Imagine that. Do plate tectonics affect climate change?
According to British Geological Survey, the movement of the plates also causes volcanoes and mountains to form, and these can also contribute to a change in climate.
Can a meteor affect climate change? Internet is slow. I guess she
According
does.
to Wikipedia, if an asteroid were to strike land or a shallow body of water, it would eject an enormous amount of dust, ash, and other material into the atmosphere, blocking the radiation from the sun. This would cause the global temperature to decrease drastically.
Oh, look at that. So if a big meteor were to hit the Earth, it would again blacken the skies, so the Earth's temperature would drop, basically affecting climate change, possibly killing off dinosaurs. Can a large meteorite affect climate change?
According to Wikipedia, if an asteroid were to strike land or a shallow body of water, it would eject an enormous amount of dust, ash, and other material into the atmosphere, blocking the radiation from the sun.
What would happen if a comet hit the Earth?
Here's a summary from Scientific American. A collision between a comet and the Earth would be a calamitous event. Then dust from the impact and smoke from the fires girdles the Earth, plunging our planet into a so-called impact winter.
Imagine that. Another astrological event that could plummet us into a winter. Was Antarctica always frozen?
According to National Museum Wales, Antarctica hasn't always been covered with ice. The continent lay over the South Pole without freezing over for almost 100 million years.
What may have caused Antarctica to become frozen?
According to National Museum Wales, the prime suspect is a gradual reduction of CO2 in the atmosphere, combined with a trigger, time when Earth's orbit around the sun made Antarctic summers cold enough for ice to remain frozen all year round.
So CO2 is necessary for us to survive here. Basically, it keeps us warm, it keeps the plants alive as well, because plants will not grow when it's frozen, right? We can't find any plant life on Mars. We definitely are not going to find any on Uranus, right? So CO2 is necessary. What does CO2 contribute to plants? She will get there. She's reading.
According to The Conversation, higher concentrations of carbon dioxide make plants more productive because photosynthesis relies on using the sun's energy to synthesize sugar out of carbon dioxide and water.
So you want to save the planet? Plant more plants. Grow more fruit trees, more berries, more grass, more trees, right? They tell you CO2 is bad, but we are in a symbiotic relationship between all the animals and all the plants. The plants cannot live without us, we cannot live without them, and vice versa. What's another good question to ask? Has Antarctica had any plant life on it?
According to British Antarctic Survey, there are no trees or shrubs and only two species of flowering plants are found, Antarctic hairgrass and Antarctic prowort.
Has Antarctica ever had trees?
According to Oceanwide Expeditions, in a small part of Alexander Island, on the west coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, ancient fossil trees that date back 100 million years can be found, with logs up to 7 meters high still found standing upright.
Did Antarctica ever have trees?
According to ocean-wide expeditions, they found fossil fragments of 13 trees and discovered fossils of trees that are over 260 million years old, meaning that this particular forest was growing at the end of the Permian period, before the first dinosaurs.
So there you have it. Again, climate change long before we even walked out of a cave or somehow came up from some puddle of mud. The climate has been changing, it will change, and it is necessary for things to be, right? When you apply logic to everything. Let me think of another question. What would happen if all the ice on Earth was to melt?
According to American Museum of Natural History, if all the ice covering Antarctica, Greenland, and in mountain glaciers around the world were to melt, sea level would rise about 70 meters. The ocean would cover all the coastal cities, and land area would shrink significantly.
So 70 meters is about 200 feet. So in other words, if you lived somewhere in Texas, you could get in your car and drive up to Colorado somewhere and probably survive. And the chances are that people will just migrate. Now, if you look at Google Maps and you're looking for evidence of the biblical flood, as I have done, I have found it. I am pretty sure it exists. It is common tale amongst all the different species of humans across the planet. The biblical flood was real, another example of climate change, right? So we would just simply migrate to a different area, even if it was to change that drastically. Personally, I'd like to see Antarctica melt down, and I want to see what the fuck is there through global satellite surveillance, if the governments would allow it. Where does CO2 come from?
According to Project, natural sources include decomposition, ocean release, and respiration. Human sources come from activities like cement production, deforestation, as well as the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas.
What do plants do with CO2?
According to The Conversation, photosynthesis acts as the lungs of our planet. Plants use light and carbon dioxide to make the sugars they need to grow, releasing oxygen in the process.
So there you have it. You want to eliminate all the CO2 in the world, you're going to eliminate the oxygen. What do we need to survive as a human species? We need oxygen. But if you want the plant to be healthier, you plant more plants, you plant more trees, you plant more grass, more berries, more fruits. You plant them all. They absorb this CO2, they turn them into sugars through a process called photosynthesis. We eat them, the animals eat them, and then it gets recycled into the grander scheme of things. How old is the Earth?
The age of Earth is 4,543,000,000 years.
When did modern man first arrive upon this planet?
300,000 years ago. According to The Conversation, bones of primitive Homo sapiens first appear 300,000 years ago in Africa, with brains as large or larger than ours.
So again, we arrived approximately 300,000 years ago, but the climate's been changing long before man ever arrived here. What got Earth out of the deep freeze?
Carbon dioxide. According to Science Daily, Carbon dioxide helped ancient Earth escape deathly deep freeze.
There you go. I think that's enough. You guys feel free to research your own evidence. Feel free to ask Google, and ask multiple questions. Never take one side for granted. Never listen to one source of information. Always ask who, what, when, where, why. There's 5 of them. Who, what, where, when, why. Have a good day.